The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
As of right now, on our reporting, it has not happened yet, but don't be surprised if by the time you get this episode, it has happened. Chris Kreider of the New York Rangers, there's been talk of him being moved to the Anaheim Ducks. Could be done by today. We'll see on that. CJ, what's the latest on the Rangers moving on from their longtime winger in Chris Kreider?
Well, as of this recording, Chris Kreider has not waived his no movement clause in order to have that trade go through. So, it's believed that there's nothing that's gone awry here per se, but there's, from a timing perspective, there's nothing that says this deal has to happen. It's not like there's a game tomorrow that he's got to waive a no movement clause and get on a plane and go somewhere to play. And it's a big decision for him. Chris Kreider has had a pretty impressive and long career with the Rangers. He's, a franchise top tenor, if not a leader in a lot of categories. We're talking about a 100-plus-year-old franchise, of course, in the Rangers. And so, I think that he's just taking in all the information he can before deciding what's next for him. But look, the writing's on the wall here. We've seen, starting with Barclay Goodrow being put on waivers last summer, Jacob Trouba being traded. There's, you can go back to the memo that was leaked early in the season in which both Trouba and Kreider's name was circulated to the other GMs by Chris Drury in terms of him being available and them being available. So, I think this has been coming and look, players can have no movement clauses, and there are many of them around the league. But, ultimately, when the team decides it wants to move you, generally speaking, then the best I think a no movement clause we can say will do is allows maybe a player to avoid going to a few teams. But, generally speaking, it's hard to hold your ground when you're being told, the team wants to move on from you and not have a trade happen. So, I think for this case, nothing is done until it's done. It's always possible, I suppose, that something could happen that would interrupt this, but I don't get the sense that's the case. I think it's we're just waiting for Kreider officially give his blessing for the deal, and he'll be a member of the Anaheim Ducks.
Anything we know on the return that could be coming the Rangers' way?
Well, I think the most significant part of the trade for the Rangers' perspective is that they're offloading the player with no salary retention. So, the remaining 2 years on Kreider's deal would be going to Anaheim in this deal. I believe I saw Larry Brooks had reported on a prospect's name. Larry's pretty spot on with these things typically. So, but I think it's one of those trades. Well, there's still certainly a world where Chris Kreider recovers because, last season there were a lot of things in addition to seeing friends traded away and kind of the organization plummet, as he had some health challenges and setbacks that he had in some prior years. This guy's been a pretty reliable scorer. And so in a world, I think, where the cap is going up, his $6.5 million ticket will not look that onerous, but, the Rangers are at a point where they're looking for some flexibility, obviously looking to change things up with the makeup of their team. And so getting that $6.5 million cap space is I think part of, what's really appealing in this for the Rangers.
You mentioned the fact that they had the memo earlier this year and they've been looking to make some changes. We know about the Jacob Trouba debacle as it is. Funny enough, in Anaheim, I wonder he's probably one of those guys talking to Chris Kreider as we speak. I wonder if there could be a domino effect to come. Could there be more changes? Could there be more looks at some of the mainstays on the Rangers? I wonder how players on the Rangers feel about the idea that a guy like Chris Kreider, who's meant so much to that franchise, could be moving on.
Well, it's a good point. And look, change is hard. And it wasn't so long ago that this team was, in the top 8, call it, in the league. You know what I mean? Like a team that every year you were saying if certain things go right, maybe they're a cup team, playing multiple playoff rounds. They lost to the Panthers in the conference final in recent memory, right? So, and look where the Panthers are today. So, they did get pretty close as a core, and obviously now, I don't see how there isn't going to be a bit more of a step back. I don't think they intend to rebuild fully, but there's a big change at the top of the team, and so when you look at what other dominoes are there, I mean, it's hard not to then look to Mika Zibanejad, who's a player in a similar situation to Kreider in that he has a no movement clause. Mika doesn't want to move on from the Rangers. And I'm not saying he definitely will, but, if he's got to be looking around, seeing to some degree where things are headed and wondering about his own future there. He didn't have a great year last year either. Again, I think there's a lot of factors involved in that. It's not just on his shoulders, but, that's probably the next place we'll all be wondering because, him and Kreider were close. They've been teammates for a long time. And so, if the changes keep coming, that might be the next place to find one. Another factor there, if it happens too, is that, this is a summer where there's a lot of teams looking for help down the middle, and there's definitely not enough players available in free agency to satisfy all the needs out there. The trade market, I think, will be relatively fertile on that front, but, there's going to be a high demand for teams looking for help at center. And if everything keeps lining up the way kind of these dominoes are falling, you just wonder, how appealing Zibanejad becomes in that marketplace. And then ultimately it'll be right where we sit today with Kreider. He would have to agree to any deal that happens. And, I think that the difference in the Kreider case right now is there's been a lot of talk between, his agent and the Rangers. I think they've worked together to a degree on this. And so, I think Kreider probably knew that for some time now that he was likely done as a Ranger. It's now just getting to the part where it becomes official. I don't think things are not that advanced at all in the Zibanejad case. And look, we'll see if maybe he ends up sticking around. But, it just feels like it's headed in a certain direction over a period of time. I just don't know what that period of time is going to be.
If nothing else, for the Rangers, I mean, you mentioned earlier the fact that they'd be getting $6.5 million off their books. That's a team that all of a sudden has about $15 million in cap space entering July 1. They become a team of interest for the free agent period. Is that a correct assessment?
I think that's fair. I mean, they still have Will Cooley to sign, who's coming off a really nice year. And, if you see some people out there talking about offer sheet candidates, his name has been mentioned. I think that becomes a little less of a threat when you have that additional cap space coming. But look, the Rangers are always a free agent destination. New York is the market a lot of players are attracted to. They're an organization known, kind of ironically, I guess, because of maybe where the public perception sits now, but they're known as a place that looks after their players, that doesn't cut any corners when it comes to just the amenities, how they travel, how they live day to day. I mean, it's known as a place that guys are going to want to go to. And so I don't think, obviously there's some players that I think have had, rough endings in the last year, and there's probably some hurt feelings involved in that. I don't think we'll be saying, oh, it's July 1st and no one wants to go play for the Rangers. I think as long as they have the cap space available to bid for guys, it's going to be an appealing place. And so, yeah, I think that they'll be in the mix, but, to be with Cooley still to be signed, they almost need still more cap space if we're talking about them getting in on some of the most influential of the free agents. So, we'll have to see. There's still a few weeks left till July 1st. And, as I said, it's pretty evident if you look back over the last 12 months, the series of moves they've had, bringing players in and out, signing Shesterkin long-term, they're trying to shift around the makeup of that team. And so probably the next place you land is free agency, where they've, again, had lots of hits and misses over the years. But, the last time there was a free agent as big as Mitch Marner out there, it was Artemi Panarin. And, he wanted to go to New York, and he's still in New York. So, I think forevermore the Rangers will be a place, as long as they have the cap space. If they can be bidding kind of in the same ballpark on money, they're going to be attracting free agents.
All right, we'll wait and see. I mean, that's what a lot of New Yorkers have to do right now. Wait and see on this Chris Kreider trade. Wait and see on a new coach for the New York Knicks. They keep striking out on that point. A lot of waiting going on in the city of New York, CJ. As we continue in the Metropolitan Division, we should go to the Pittsburgh Penguins next. A report surfacing yesterday that Fenway Sports Group could be looking to sell the Penguins, and that Ron Burkle, Mario Lemieux, and David Morehouse could be looking to buy the Pens back from Fenway Sports Group. Why would FSG want out of the Penguins?
Well, that part of the story isn't actually new. Like, it's been known that they've at least been shopping a minority stake in the team. I think it's pretty clear, though. They bought the key part of that report from our colleague Pierre Lebrun is, first of all, Mario Lemieux. Anytime he wants to get back in on Penguins ownership after, basically saving the team, quite frankly, many years ago. But that group of men that you mentioned were also the group that sold the team in 2021 to Fenway Sports Group. So I think it's fair to characterize the 4 years of ownership as that on both sides, the NHL and FSG and the NHL. I don't think it's just been a great partnership. I think clearly with Fenway Sports Groups is, owning, its soccer team and the Red Sox and, being involved in big sports, they were obviously an attractive ownership candidate for the NHL when they first came around to buy the Penguins. And I just feel like neither side has been sort of happy with how it's gone. Now, why exactly that is, I don't have all the precise information there, but I do have a general sense that the league hasn't been particularly thrilled, with what FSG's been as owners and vice versa. I think the FSG has had some ideas of maybe the league should be run in different ways. And so, look, it's also been a tough time to own the Penguins. I mean, they've owned the Penguins when things are going in the wrong direction, right? We still look at that team like, I don't even know if we can say they've really started the rebuild. I guess they have, but they've kept, of course, their most attractive, biggest name players. They've missed the playoffs already for 3 straight years. Kyle Dubas, it's clearer and clearer every time you see him quoted in public, understands how big of a project he's got on his hands. And so as a result of that, the business suffers, right? It's just harder to get people to buy tickets. It's harder to get people in the market excited about your team. And so, it's been that's probably an immeasurable part of what I'm saying in that it hasn't been an easy time to own that team, and it hasn't gone particularly great on a lot of fronts. And so, the headline here, of course, Lemieux wants to save the Penguins again. Certainly not painting it as the kind of dire situation it was when they were nearly sold and moved, I think, to Kansas City, to Hamilton. At that point in time, there was, they were still playing out of the Igloo. I think there was legitimate question about the viability of the franchise. We're not in that kind of position today, but, I think it's hard for Mario to sit from afar watching this and kind of see where things have gotten to. So, there's another group engaged with Fenway Sports on buying this team. So, it feels a little bit like this attempt to purchase a team is coming in late. But, perhaps they'll get public sentiment on their side. I'm not sure how that will or will not affect negotiations. But, obviously, I think a lot of excitement in Pittsburgh anytime Mario wants to be involved. I mean, he's everything in that city, even with all the great players they've had, even with Sidney Crosby having won more Stanley Cups with the Penguins. Him and the Malkin Letang group has 3 compared to 2 that Mario's teams won back in the 90s. But Mario is the main reason that there are Pittsburgh Penguins, that's an entity. So, we'll have to see if they can get something worked out. But I'll tell you this, when Pierre put out that tweet, I did not see that one coming. I'll say that. Just the idea that Lemieux would want to get back in. The guys who just sold the team 4 years ago want to buy it back. That's probably happened somewhere along the line in the NHL, but it's not usually common sentiment. Usually you sell the team, you get paid out because you tend to sell these things for more than you bought them for, and you step in and do other things. But these guys want another crack at it, and it'd be fascinating what might change if they were ever to get it. But that's getting way ahead of ourselves here because it's still in the infancy stages of them trying to see if there's a way to purchase the club.
Never a dull moment with the Pittsburgh Penguins, at least in recent years, right? We've talked about Kyle Dubas with this team. We've talked about Sidney Crosby enough on this podcast. We probably can't talk about him enough. They get a new head coach, Dan Muse, a couple of days ago, gets introduced this week. A lot to, and now this story with Fenway Sports Group. Just, run-of-the-mill team, nothing to see here. Totally uninteresting, the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Well, they remind me a little of Edmonton as a franchise, just that they've been lucky to have like waves and waves of generational talents go through them. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you look at the Oilers playing in their 9th Cup final right now, going back 40 years or whatever it's been. That's a lot for one franchise in a now a 32 team league, but what's been a 30 team league and even 21 teams when Edmonton was first coming around. So, they've just had those waves, and Pittsburgh's had them too with Lemieux, Yager, Crosby, Malkin, Letang down the list. And then, they're at the point where they need to find the next wave. Now, it might not be a singularly great player that drives the franchise's success. I'm sure they would love that. But they have to find a way to get out of kind of the muck they're in, I think, and they have to, at some point, figure out what the future is. I mean, Malkin's entering the last year of his deal. I think, fair to assume this could be his last season that we're going to witness coming up in 25-26 in the NHL. And so if that is indeed the case, I mean, you're going to get a major sort of shift just from that fact. But you're right. Compelling team right now because I think a lot is up in the air. It's not, I don't think we have any reason to believe they're going to be ultra competitive next season. And they're kind of stuck in this tough spot with living legends still on their roster. Crosby's still great, as you mentioned, but we're not opening the can of worms yet on that. But you just wonder is he willing to play out the next 2 seasons left on his deal still in Pittsburgh? I mean, I think it's going to. I know it's a question that's been discussed, but it's going to keep being talked about. Like you can't ignore the fact that one of the game's greatest all-time players is on an organization that's kind of playing out the string right now. When he's still playing at a level where he's not personally in that spot, and we know all the things attached to that. So yes, I'm sure we'll keep talking about the Penguins on an intermittent schedule, but let's not burn everything down right now.
Let's not do that right now. Yeah, I like that. I don't want Robert Rossi or anyone else from the Pittsburgh contingent getting at us if we get to that point. We should move on. We started with
the media get feisty there when you even talk about it. They take it personally weirdly when it's just a discussion point. I guess their argument would be because every time Crosby's asked, he'll say, "I only want to play in Pittsburgh." But he also wants to win. Like that guy didn't become Sidney Crosby, by playing on teams that miss the playoffs every year. I mean, in fact, his team missed the playoffs his first NHL season and then made it for like 16 years in a row. So, maybe the international stuff will be enough to tide him over, maybe, but it's still a question. And it's a conversation that isn't just being had between you and I on a podcast. It's a conversation happening behind the scenes with GMs, with everybody that cares about the game. So, to say that we shouldn't even talk about it is be careful. That's all I'll say.
All right. You're getting producer Drew really excited when you say those words, by the way, knowing his allegiance to the Colorado Avalanche and a certain fellow Nova Scotian.
I'm not saying anything.
All right. We won't do that. Let's move on to Los Angeles. That's the site of this month's NHL draft. But the city, of course, has had protests over federal immigration enforcement raids. The NHL obviously monitoring that as it pertains to the draft. What are we hearing with that?
Well, I mean, they're just going to have to make a call when it gets closer. I mean, if there's, I'm going to call it a positive, but what I mean is obviously the circumstances here, there's nothing positive about what's going on. But if there's a positive, this is a scaled down NHL draft, right? And you're talking the top 50 prospects being invited, one representative from each team, nowhere near the same number of media, agents, scouts, what have you. It's not, typically the draft is literally hockey's convention. And so there's a lot of people flying in for that event. In this case, it's a much smaller version of that idea. So if they have to, really they can't, it's way beyond the league's control. So if it gets close enough and they have to make a decision, they can make that decision. I'm not sure what the contingencies look like if they can't pull it off, but I think that there are still ways to do some version of it, but let's just hope it doesn't come to that fact. And so, really where the league is at is just trying to understand what's going to be allowed, there's could be curfews in play. I guess if this happened 10 years ago, I'd be a little bit more alarmed about what's going to happen. Since in those 10 years, we saw the NHL pull off a Stanley Cup final in a bubble in a pandemic. So, I think that not that anyone wants to even think back to that COVID period in our lives, but I think that the league learned a lot about being nimble and being creative to get through, not just the NHL. Let's face it, every professional sports organization faced those same challenges. And here we are on the other side, and the games are still going on, and the league survived and the team survived. So it's a long way of saying I think that they'll figure it out. But right now, we just don't know what the city's going to look like, in 10 days or 2 weeks' time, I guess, when the draft's held.
Okay. And one more news and notes before we look beyond that. What about the possibility of hockey again in Atlanta? Forsyth County Commission yesterday approving agreements for a $3 billion mixed-use project, that includes an NHL-ready arena. And we've known there have been efforts to try to bring hockey back again for a third time in Atlanta. What are we hearing on that?
There's actually, Julian, more than one group trying to get an arena built in different areas around the city. So I do think that a lot of things are lining up that suggest there's going to be a team in Atlanta, but let's tap the brakes a little bit in terms of timelines and things like that. I mean, you got to get a shovel in the ground. You got to get, something built where the team can play. And, the way the NHL's treated things this time around, they don't want to open any official expansion processes. They're basically saying any team, any group that has an interest is free to set up a meeting and have those discussions with the NHL's head office. But they want you to come with a proposal and a plan in place. And what's I think notable about this project that seems to be moving forward is that, the prospective owner there has said that he wants, and he said this publicly, that he wants to have a meeting with the commissioner after the playoffs are done, once we get through the Stanley Cup final. So, maybe there's things will start to advance a little bit more, once that happens. But look, I don't know how to feel about it because Atlanta has been such a challenge in the past. But, look at times change, city dynamics change, and we've seen in other parts where if you get the right facility in the right place, run by the right person, markets that were once thought, there's no way it'll ever work here, become very, very appealing very quickly. In fact, I'm sitting on one right now. I'm in Florida, and I'm going to go to a Stanley Cup final game here tonight. I mean, there was no organization that was the butt of jokes, that was a punchline, that felt like they would never get it right. Like this one, and here they are in their third straight Stanley Cup final. So, I think that there are those kind of tales. I mean, Tampa at periods has been down and out. Jeff Vidic buys a team. He develops that whole area around the rink, runs things the right way, hires the right people, lets them do their jobs. They go to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals before these 3. So I guess it's a way of saying, I could understand with the population there, with the amount of money in that city, with other major sports franchises having success there, I can understand the appeal for the NHL. And so I do believe we're going to see we'll see a third NHL team eventually, but I think it's going to take some time. That's the one thing I'd say. Things are advancing, but it's not like they're starting play in next year or 2 years or something like that. I think it's still, you're still looking at window of time before the league has to officially make any decisions.
All right. Selfishly, I hope it works out. Atlanta would be a cool city to visit, period, and particularly if it ends up on the NHL circuit again. I know I'd try to find a way to go if I'm still covering the Sens or whatever team I'm covering at that time. I don't know.
Don't put out that energy. If I'm still covering, what is that all about? When you're still working, when you're still covering this league.
I'm bouncing. It was less about it was less about whether or not I'll still be covering the NHL, and more about I don't know. I was just making a crack about how I've covered 3 teams.
But I'm thinking, do you have big news to announce here? Are you switching jobs?
No.
Are you becoming a full-time author and just stepping away from the day-to-day?
No, there's no news. There's nothing cryptic about that. It's just
Okay, good.
trying to look ahead to time. Okay, we're good. We're good. I'm not going anywhere.
I get it. Live in the moment, and we don't know what's going to come.
That's it, man. You try to handle it as best as you can. Anyway, I would like to know what you're hearing about a few guys. I have a list of names in front of me here, and I'm just going to give you a name, and you tell me what you're hearing about them, just in terms of rumors, contract stuff, trades. Does that sound like a cool idea?
Let's do it. No
First
notes.
name on the list for me. No notes. No notes. First name on the list for me. Marco Rossi out of the Minnesota Wild. What are you hearing about him?
Well, certainly the Wild have had a fair number of conversations about trading him. He is a restricted free agent this summer, so he needs a new contract. I suppose there's always the possibility if they get to July 1st, maybe someone tries to offer sheet him. Although the one thing I'd point out is that Minnesota, while being in cap jail for years, is finally free of that cap jail. They've got a lot of money or a lot of space to spend. They have needs as a team. They have a Kirill Kaprizov deal to work out an extension, and then they have to figure out what they're doing with Rossi. And so, we're talking about a player on the smaller side, but still a player that had 60 points last season when Minnesota went through some injuries. He really stepped up and was one of the guys that helped keep things on the rails there for them. And ultimately they did reach the playoffs and had a chance, frankly, to beat the Vegas Golden Knights in round one before ultimately losing. So, he's shown a lot, and, he wants to get paid. And I just think that relationship is at a spot where Minnesota's try to determine what he is, and do they believe it can be a long-term, say, second-line center? Is he worthy of some of the contracts out there that players have with that? And if not, what can they get for him on the trade market? So, it's still a little preliminary to say where he's going to land or anything like that. But, he's definitely a name who's circulating out there. Had him pretty high on the last trade board I did a couple weeks ago. I think number 2, if I'm not mistaken, behind Kreider at number 1. And so, because of the needs, et cetera, kind of to revisit our earlier conversation or topic on Zibanejad, I think there should be something that makes sense for them. But, Minnesota, I don't think you're trading him just for, say, a pick or something. I mean, maybe they do and flip it for something else, but, I think Minnesota is going to want a player. And so those trades can be tougher to make, but, we are entering a unique offseason, I think, where we're going to see a lot of movement in various fronts. There's obviously a lot more money being pumped into the system. So teams have more at their disposal to go out and try to fill their needs. And one of the ways they'll do that is through trades. And so stay tuned on Rossi, because I think he'll continue to be a name that gets a lot of attention until the draft period, essentially, when we get a little closer and if a deal can get done.
Yeah, the talk of the Wild wanting a player in return sounds consistent with what I've heard too. I'm wondering if it just gets to a point where maybe another team out there has another young player where they feel, maybe you flip them in return for Rossi. That maybe that's the right way to do it. I don't know if you're going to get to a point where you see like a really established player, but that's just me talking at that point. I'm also curious too.
Well, Rossi himself, I would say, is not fully established. I mean, obviously he's young, and so you're seeing him grow. But I think there's still a question of exactly what is he? What's he going to be? Again, he's young. This isn't on him. Some time will answer all these questions, but he hasn't spent a lot of time in the NHL yet, and so that's part of the challenge, I think, of doing a new contract with him. Because obviously his agent will be doing his job and will be looking at all the best case scenarios of what he might be. And this guy had 60 points in his second season, this is how it goes down. And the team might be like, whoa, let's go shorter and cheaper and take more time before we have to decide what you are and where your fair level is. So, I'm not talking established player necessarily. You're right. It could be someone in a similar situation. But, I do think, We've probably already seen him play his last game as a Wild. It's just, it's the off season. So it just because the trade didn't happen yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I think just stay tuned there.
I don't want to belabor the point on Marco Rossi too long. I'm just curious, if you're a GM out there and you see that he's available and you see that there's a possibility for him and you see the 60 points, talking about him not necessarily being established, you see the 60 points in the regular season, but then you see his ice time and his deployment in the playoffs where he wasn't necessarily playing like a second line center. He did get like a multi-point game partway through the series against Vegas, but that's not a guy who was playing 18, 19, 20, 21
minutes. 11 minutes a night, roughly.
That's it, right? Like, that's the biggest question I have if I'm a GM and I'm trying to make it to the playoffs and I'm trying to be a playoff team. I don't know if I have enough on that front to feel comfortable saying, hey, you know what, this guy's going to take it to that next level. Or I don't know. I would love to know what you think about that.
Well, I think partly this almost goes to a broader discussion we could have. Like, the playoffs in hockey compared to the regular season is probably the biggest difference in the way the game is played of any of the sports that I'm aware of, where, like, quite literally what brings a team success in December changes between what brings a team success in May and June. And so I think there's almost a larger discussion about, obviously you need players that can help get you to the playoffs. And then, every team is also trying to win a Stanley Cup. And sometimes not all those things align, right? I mean, I think it's fair to say this Panthers team we're watching, is built more to have success in the playoffs than during the regular season. I think they also, having been to all these cups in a row, you run into some motivation issues perhaps in the regular season with a team like this. They play such a style. I mean, these guys would kill themselves if they played this way 82 games and then tried to go in the playoffs. They have to almost conserve, I think, some of their edge, we'll call it. And so I think there's some of that with Rossi. There's some of, look, the coach, there's one coach that basically decides your ice time. And I'm not putting this all on John Hines, but like, what does it tell us? It tells us that John Hines obviously didn't see him as a second line center in that series against Vegas, but that's not to say another coach wouldn't think differently. If you look at some of the NHL edge data, Rossi does score a lot from around the net. Like, there's evidence there that even though he's a smaller player, that he does get to the hard areas of the ice and has had success there. So, I think beauty can be in the eye of the beholder. And, there's certainly different people in the game that view players in different ways, right? I mean, I think that's, some would say every defenseman should be 6'5" and big and lumbering. And then, that's also ignoring what Quinn Hughes is, right? And so there's exceptions to every rule. And I'm not saying there's a rule against Marco Rossi being a top line NHL player, but, because of his size, there's those questions there. And I'm sure those are questions I'm sure he's faced his whole life. It's not like it's only he just got to the NHL. It's like, wow, this guy's small. Like, he's been a smaller person, and yet he's persevered. He's had success internationally, and now he's reached the NHL and had a 60-point season. So, what you're saying is true, that could be a warning light for some, but I think anyone looking at trading him has to sort of reconcile all those factors I mentioned and wonder maybe in their system or with their team, that if he might fill a need still, even if he, if he's not a complete package, because other than maybe one or two guys in the whole world, no one's a true package. Like there's things that you're great at, and then there's like, oh yeah, but maybe only so in that area. And obviously size is one of those things for Marco.
Okay. I like that. I didn't mean to spend too long on Marco Rossi, but I think it was a pretty good discussion to have anyway. Let's go through the rest of this list here. Elias Pettersson out in Vancouver. What are you hearing about him?
I don't expect him to be traded. He's got a no move clause kicking in as of July 1st. So I understand why there could be talk about it out there. I mean, obviously his name was part of trade discussions last season. Ultimately, the Canucks moved on from JT Miller instead of him. And, because of the fact that the team loses the ability to trade him without his consent in, 3 weeks' time, you get rumors will stem from that. But my understanding of where things are at now is that, the Canucks are hoping he has a big summer, that this year was an aberration, not the rule, because obviously his production dipped pretty significantly, at a time where he's paid among the best paid forwards out there. So unless something changes or I'm missing something, I don't see him as a likely trade candidate. But with that one important caveat that basically if there's still any thought in the Canucks back of their minds that this is something we should do, the time to do it would be right now, before it gets a lot more complicated with no move clauses and the like. But I think that because of his value would be depressed at a point like this. Not the right time probably to trade him, just in terms of where his career cycle's at, and getting the best value back in return. And so, it seems more than likely he's going to remain in Vancouver.
Man, I feel there's got to be that pressure on him to rebound back, not just for his sake, but if it doesn't go well for him and the Canucks as they are, like I just have this bad feeling about the Vancouver Canucks and talk about Quinn Hughes and all that and the changes they've already endured. Like Elias Pettersson, like I just feel like there's going to be that pressure on him to do well that goes beyond just for himself.
For sure, but that's what comes with being, wanting to be a star. This guy had 100 points. Like it's the proof of concept is there, right? Like we've when I talk about not knowing what Rossi is, we know what Elias Pettersson is at his best. He's just been a long way from his best for a long time now, and so I think that you're 100% right that there's the pressure there, but he's got to find a way to fight through that. I mean, every single player that's playing Game 4 of the Cup final today has a lot of pressure, and they've pushed through it. And they're, they've learned to live with it and manage it and all those things. And so you're hitting it on the head, but he's got to find a way to do it. And if he can't, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So he's still at an age where there's no reason it can't happen. You know what I mean? Like I don't think it's like his body's in total decline or anything like that. But it does need to be a big summer for him, and I'd have to think the motivation is pretty high to get his career back on track and become a superstar in the league again, which is what earned him that contract to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Back to the list. Aaron Ekblad of the Florida Panthers.
Well, he couldn't have been more clear in an article that our colleague Mike Russo wrote about wanting to remain in Florida. He said basically, I've given my body for the Florida Panthers. And he loves playing for this team. Florida, they're not afraid. First of all, like this isn't a totally unprecedented situation to have the UFAs, and I'm sure you got questions about a couple other ones. This close to July 1st, to have them unsigned. They have a lot of confidence in what they built as an organization, and they generally keep to a certain budget when they're negotiating with their players. And so, Ekblad's probably going to eventually be left with the decision to take an amount of money in Florida or go to the market where he can make more. But you're taking on, you have to move. There's some risk always when you make that decision. Is the fit going to be as good as it's been? He's been a great Panther for a long time. He was a first overall draft pick when they were lost in the wilderness, and they were a team that played in front of a half-empty building most nights at home. And he's been part of the group that's changed that, a big part of it. He's been their number one right shot defenseman for a decade and played big minutes, played all situations, and given his body, as he mentions. I think part of what the Panthers love about Ekblad is the way he sacrifices his body, how hard he plays. But, when you get to his age, there's probably some concern there about the length of the deal too. Just how he'll age because of all the miles that have been put on the odometer. So this is a tougher one to handicap because the series is going on. And obviously, I don't think there's like active negotiations in the middle of the Stanley Cup final. There's been conversations, of course, between his agent and Bill Zito that could happen sort of to the side so that everyone knows where they're at when it gets time to make that call. But, it's a little like Sam Bennett. It's a little like Sam Reinhart last year, who won a Stanley Cup and then wound up, getting a deal done June 30th, July 1st to stay there rather than actually hit the open market. We'll just have to see where Aaron's priorities lie. And really, is there a deal he can take where maybe he's not totally maximizing his value, but he can feel valued at the same time? And that can be a tricky road to walk. That's it's something the Leafs are trying to do, for example, with John Tavares. I mean, finding that sweet spot where everybody feels comfortable it's not always easy in a hard cap league. And so, the Panthers wisely, I think, acquired Seth Jones this season. It's kind of almost like insurance. I mean, ideally you'd like to keep both players, but if if it doesn't work out with Ekblad, they at least, have a player who can step into a lot of his minutes and usage and roles, as Jones had to do, quite frankly, when Ekblad missed that 20 games in March and into the start of the playoffs after the PED suspension. So, I think Florida wants to keep him. He wants to stay, but finding that right contract, is going to be a big hurdle. I think that's the main reason he's not taken care of already.
Okay. Let's go to John Tavares. What are we hearing about him?
Well, the Leafs and his agent are having discussions. I mean, certainly the dialogue has picked up there since the end of the season. Tavares is in an interesting spot. We know how much he wants to stay in Toronto. That's not a secret. But he's also coming off a pretty darn good year. And I think it's easy to look past that a little bit. Like, I think it gets lost publicly to some degree. I think it was 38 goals, 74 points, if I'm not mistaken. Look at the free agent list. You got Marner in the top slot. Obviously, he's a 100-point guy this year. Next up, you probably got Sam Bennett, 50-point guy in his career, like his 150-point season now. A lot of intangibles there that aren't measured just with goals or assists. And he scored a lot of goals in this playoffs. But, you keep going down, like Matt Duchene you get to his name eventually. He had an 80-plus point season this year, but there's not a lot of guys, is my point, who could score you 38 goals and get you 70 points available. And so 100% he can. I think, Brock Nelson signed a 3-year deal at $7.5 million. I have to believe that offer or even more would be out there for John Tavares if he got to a point where he was testing the market and was, basically making his services available to all the teams. He doesn't want to do that yet. And the Leafs obviously are trying to get something that looks like a hometown discount from him, but it's similar to the Ekblad discussion that where do you find that number? And if you're Tavares, think about it from his perspective. Like, obviously he wants to work with the team. He feels like he's put a lot into trying to win a Stanley Cup in Toronto, and he still believes that they're going to get it right one day, that they're going to find the way. But let's say he takes a major discount and signs that deal tomorrow, Julian, just for fun. Then it gets to July 1st, and the Leafs are out there bidding for free agents and like overpaying guys who are older than Tavares, who are coming off of seasons that aren't nearly as impressive as his. Like, money isn't just the money, right? It represents something more than that. I don't think we have to worry about Tavares, buying a new pair of shoes if he feels like he wants something, or looking after his family. But, I do think that the money matters, and he's put a lot into his career, right? Like, anyone who reaches the levels that he's reached has sacrificed, his whole life. Not made easy choices, got out of bed on days he didn't feel like it to get to his workout in, or played through his own pain or things that have gone on. I mean, it shouldn't be lost on anybody that the athletes that get to this point, like, should be rewarded for, all the things that they've done to get on the stage they are, I think. Anyway, not to make this into a big money discussion, but it's more, the money here will be interesting if they can find that spot. But, the fact they're talking, the fact that dialogue, is continuing to happen, they're both working at it. And, I look at the fact the Leafs would have to replace probably 2 centermen if they're not bringing Tavares back. That's a lot to ask in a market that's thin at the position. So he wants to stay there. They're going to need a centerman. You have to believe they're going to get there, but that's sometimes you need a little bit of pressure, in the form of a deadline to get to a deal, right? And so we'll just have to see where that goes here in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, next one on the list we haven't really talked about a lot on the pod. I'm very curious to know your thoughts on Jason Robertson out of Dallas.
Well, Dallas has the least cap flexibility in the league. Part of that is because they traded for and signed Rantanen. They gave Wyatt Johnson an extension. And they've got lots of good players signed. And so I think the reason you're hearing Robertson's name out there a little bit is that for them to make a change beyond the one they've already made by changing up their head coach and firing Pete DeBoer after that Western Conference final appearance, he's a player that I think would be very attractive to other teams, would be certainly some movable contract. He's getting close to the end of his deal as well. So keep that in mind. He's going to need to be paid at some point, and the Stars might feel that that's something that they're going to have a difficult time doing is just managing all the contracts on the books. And so I think that creates the circumstances where they at least have to consider the possibility. It's not a case of like, this guy has to go, he's terrible. It's not like that. I mean, it's very clearly driven by their circumstances. And, I don't know if he's going to be moved. It's not, they don't have to do it, but I think they have to consider it first. And when with what he does well, which is put the puck in the net. I mean, that's something a lot of teams are looking for. It's appealing in a lot of situations. And so I think that his name is out there to the degree that you got to think about some concepts. I mean, if you're Dallas, 3 years in a row, you got to conference final. Like you are right there, right? You are knocking at the door. You're playing the games everybody wants to play, but your season's ending 2 weeks or 3 weeks sooner than you wanted to. And so they're looking at everything they can do to get over the hump, so to speak, to get, I mean, it sounds crazy to say a team that's in the Final Four every year needs to get over the hump, but I mean, they want to win. They want to win the thing, right? So I think that they have to be open to lots of ideas. They have some other free agents on the older side, like Duchesne and Jamie Benn. I think both of those players want to be back. And so to keep everybody, you might have to make a hard choice. And it could be that choice becomes Jason Robertson.
Okay. Brad Marchand is the last person on my list. I know we've talked about him a lot, but anything else you want to say on him?
Well, he keeps scoring every game. So, I mean, the guy's got 4 goals in the Stanley Cup final and through 3 games at age 37. So we're talking about him because he keeps giving us a reason to talk about him. I should mention that the teams are going to have to announce their first 6 players for the Olympics. I think that announcement could come as soon as Monday. And a year ago when Team Canada did that for the Four Nations tournament, Marchand was among the 6. This time around, I don't expect him to be among the 6, but that doesn't mean his career is still in a pretty good spot, especially where he came through a regular season where his production was off its usual levels. But, he's kind of erased that memory with what he's done since, right? But, having a playoffs where he's just a shade under a point per game for the Panthers, such a big driver of their success that they've had this spring. He's still got it, man. And so, I've been saying he's probably going to get a 3-year contract. The more I talk to people around the league, the more I feel he might even get a 4-year contract in free agency. We're talking about a highly motivated guy in great shape, and he wants to keep playing. Like I had a actually good chat with him yesterday, not about free agency specifically, but he's telling me he absolutely want to play past 40. Keep in mind he spends time when he's not in season with some of the most driven players that put on hockey skates anywhere in the world. Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Brad Marchand, skate together when they're in the Halifax area where they're all from in the summertime. They train together, like they push each other. And Sidney Crosby is also 37, like Marchand. So he's going to have interest. I do believe the Maple Leafs are a team that makes sense on some level here for Marchand. They have cap space to spend. They're obviously, Brad Sherliving said he's looking for a DNA change. Well, it could be a DNA transplant. Like, I guess the question would then become, if he were ever to sign in Toronto, how much can one player do? I don't actually know the answer to that, but clearly this guy has done a lot of winning through his career. He's absolutely beloved around the Panthers, having spent, quite a bit of time with them this playoffs. They rave about this guy. And so he's going to sign a major deal. Like, I think it's north of $8 million, and it could be even a 4-year deal. I'd been hearing 3, and then now it sounds like there's a thought that he might even be able to push for a 4th. So, there'll be lots of risk in that deal, as there is with any, just because of age and injuries and all those things. But he's had such a strong spring that it's hard to ignore what you're seeing every night from him. And if you're any team, so this extends to a lot of them that's looking to be playing big playoff games next spring and having success in them. I mean, it's pretty attractive, the idea that you could bring him into your locker room, into your team culture, and be part of your team for the next couple of years.
What did you think of Dangle posting the photo of Brad Marchand photoshopped his face over Dangle's body?
I loved it. And I got to say, no one likes to have a laugh more than Brad Marchand. I bet I don't know if he saw it, but if he saw it, I'm sure he laughed his ass off. Because I'm sure he's very aware. I'm sure he's very aware of Steve, just with the Bruins being in the same division as the Leafs. And obviously a lot of Steve's content has gone viral over the years with him generally freaking out about something about the Leafs. Brad seems like a guy who's been pretty online. I know he doesn't seem like he's on Twitter anymore, but he used to be kind of a funny Twitter account in the hockey space. So I'm sure he's at least vaguely aware of Steve. And so he probably got a kick out of that.
You don't remember when Brad Marchand directly went at Steve a few years ago?
Yeah, I do remember that. But you have to remember, he might have done that. He might do that and forget about it, right? It wasn't
fair.
My point is, I don't know for sure how aware he is of Steve, but I'm going to bet of the number of NHL players that could be, especially veteran guys who I'm just going to assume are less online in general than younger players. I feel like he's one of the veteran guys that could, just because he's played the Leafs in 5 playoff series. And obviously the LFRs have been going for that. The SDPN has been going for all that. I'm sure he's just seen stuff over the years. In fact, yesterday it was funny when we were chatting, once the official part of the interview was done, we were having a chuckle about some of the things that have, just happened around those series that he's been a part of with the Leafs and everything. And, I'll say this. Brad Marchand was very complimentary yesterday of where he thinks the Leafs are at, that he felt, look, they pushed Florida to Game 7. We all know how Game 7 went. We don't need to relive all of that came with it. No. But, he just mentioned that was a really, really tough series. And, I think he thinks they're kind of right there. But we'll see. This is a big summer in Toronto, too. You didn't ask about Mitch Marner, but nothing's changed there in the sense that I still believe he's going to test the open market. So, the Leafs are going to have cap space, but they also got some big roster holes to address as well.
I didn't even have Mitch Marner on my list, but of course, Mitch Marner is going to come up here. And I'm willing to bet that Brad Marchand's knowledge of Steve Dangle is more than just a vague sort of, I think he knows who he is. I don't think he has the back and forth with Steve without at least having some nugget of knowledge of who he is. That was he shared the photo of Dangle on his knees doing the little claw I'm doing. I can tell if you're listening on audio, you can't see what I'm doing, but you all know the photo I'm talking about. That's somebody who knows who he is.
Right. I remember going to Dangle's book launch years ago. They had an event at a brewery out in Whitby, and they had a life-size or bigger than life-size picture of that thing, and I was laughing my butt off at him.
It's a ridiculous photo. I think he knows who he is. Anyway, before we run out of time, give us a look ahead to Game 4 of the Cup Final Thursday night. Could the Oilers be making some roster changes? What about the Panthers? What can you tell us?
Well, it's been kind of unusual to have 2 off days in a row, 2 double off days in the series. I don't know who that benefits, but it's pretty notable to me that both Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl skated each of those off days. I mean, generally you get this deep in the playoffs. We're hitting mid-June. There's not a lot of guys going out for practice that don't have to, right? I mean, it's basically play the games and then get your rest when you can. But, clearly the Oilers, there's everything riding on this for them. I think Game 4, there may yet be a more important game in the series as it comes, but in some ways, I go 2 ways here. Even if Florida wins, Edmonton, I still see a path for Edmonton to come back because Game 5 in Edmonton is going to be bananas. And then basically they would have to come back on the road and just find a way to win one game in Florida, which, I'm not saying is easy. They've not had a lot of success at Amerant Bank Arena in these 2 Stanley Cup finals. Not only have they lost the games, but they haven't played particularly well here. But then, you got Game 7 on home ice. So I'm not going to call this a make or break game for the Oilers season, but it's whatever is 1 degree below that. And clearly, if they can find a way, as bad as Game 3 was for Edmonton, they find a way to win Game 4, that the script flips. I mean, then they just need to take care of home ice in Game 5 and 7, and they can win a Stanley Cup. They only have to win one game in Florida during the series to win the series at this point. And so they got a chance to do that in game 4. And I know that that's the only place McDavid's focus has been. Like right after I was, part of the scrums after game 3, which was just a really dispiriting loss in the moment for Edmonton. Connor was already just like, he's like, all I'm focused on is game 4 now. Like all his energy was directed towards that. And so the Oilers weren't supposed to skate on Tuesday. They changed plans like way after the game, like meaning it was directly for sure a result of what transpired that night. And they had a really upbeat long practice Tuesday. And then on Wednesday again, before Thursday's game, McDavid and Draisaitl were out there with what was the rest of kind of their scratches. So, and Trent Frederick, a couple other regulars. But the point is those guys are setting a tone. And so what am I watching for? I'm quite honestly going to this game like thinking, what are we going to get from 97 and 29? It feels like a huge night for these guys. It's fair to say everyone wants to win a Stanley Cup. People would throw their bodies in front of pucks and punches and kicks to the face. And these guys on both teams up and down the rosters are sacrificing everything to try to win. But I think even in that environment, no one wants to witness thing more than Connor McDavid, just with the pressure he shouldered and what happened last year. And so in order to win this series, they got to win one game in Florida. They got to win game 4, I think.
If you're Chris Knobloch, do you go back to Stuart Skinner for game 4 or do you go to Calvin Pickard?
I think he sticks with Skinner. Knobloch in the past has been kind of, reluctant to name his starter, we'll call it, as he's been in this case. He might be listening by now and already know who he said, but, to this point, as of early morning, the day of game 4, he hasn't officially named his starter. But, he's been pretty clear in his public comments that he doesn't put that last game on Skinner, that everybody played poorly, that it was kind of a team effort. And so I think Stuart Skinner goes into game 4 as a starter on a short leash, but I still think he starts this game. And then, if things don't go well in game 4, I think then going home, putting Pickard in for that game probably makes more sense. But clearly this is, they've ruminated on this decision. They put Pickard into the last game. They pulled Skinner that night. And part of the reasoning that Knobloch gave for that was obviously, get Stewart out of the net, allow him to, reset, but also to give Pickard some game action because it's been some time since he played, just in case they need him, that maybe that little bit of time he got in relief, can be something he can build on and just feel a little better about his game if he has to go into a big spot. So my gut tells me he's going Skinner and just hoping that they can find a way to not get sucked into the way the Panthers want to play. I think they got distracted to some degree in game 3, and then things obviously got off the rails as that got more and more away from them. But, taking 4 first period penalties is no recipe for any success for any team. So, they got to be more disciplined. They have to be willing to turn the other cheek, perhaps, to some of the things that are going to go on out there. And they have to play their best game of the year. It all comes down to this one.
Absolutely. We should get to stick taps. It's Father's Day this weekend. I think a pretty easy stick tap for both of us would be to shout out our pops, our respective dads, unless you had a specific one you wanted to mention.
Well, I don't have a better one than that. So I'm lucky to have a great dad. So, and he listens to every single one of these podcasts. So thanks for listening, supporting me, Dad, and Julian and everyone. And hope you have a great weekend and look forward to spending time together on the other side of this cup final when I finally get home again.
Yeah, man. I love my dad. I really appreciate him and everything he's done for me in my life. And I was really happy I got to spend time with him a couple weeks back when I was in Montreal, and looking forward to doing the same later this summer as well. Yeah, I like that for our stick taps. Just shouting out our dads who have meant a lot to both of us in our lives. Happy Father's Day. And with that, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Chris Johnston Show. Get your questions in for our next episode for Ask CJ, and we'll have continuing coverage of the NHL offseason and the Stanley Cup playoffs as it happens. See, great work as always, my man.
I just had a weird thought. If the series goes to game 6, I'm going to be back in Florida to record that show Monday, but I will have gone to Edmonton in the middle.
Yeah, that's kind of weird, isn't it?
It's going to be it's going to be crazy these next couple of days. If it goes to game 6, now if the series ends in game 5, not nearly as crazy. But,
no,
I thought the series would go at least 6 or 7. So I'm mentally prepared to be coming back to Florida. But that's going to be a lot of flights before I see you next, my friend.
I was about to say, yeah. I would hope for Connor McDavid's sake, he's only done one of those dig in speeches like he did last year. If he finds himself down 3-1, it's a lot of yelling to go down in the Oilers room. Anyways, for CJ, I'm Julian. So long. Enjoy your weekend. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.